Tom Zimmer.
And of course, a place for individuals like yourselves to take part in global cinema.
Hey yo, this is Logan from Australia.
Everyone who listens to Monstercat, I remind you that you're awesome.
So glad I'm here.
So get yourself ready for an hour of fresh music, and it all starts right now.
With nothing to hold us back, these are the songs of the wild.
Hey everyone, what is up, and welcome back to Monstercat's Call the Wild. Today we have a extra wild episode queued up for you, and I think a very special way to wrap up what was truly an unusual year, not just for us, but the entire world. Today we're going to take a look back at music released over the past 12 months and highlight some of the tracks which will be featured on Monstercat's Best of 2020. I think what you're going to find is even throughout a year with many challenges, this entire community and the artists behind it became a beacon of hope for us all. So I'm very honored to be a part of this today and to be joined by Josh, also known as Rocket Man, who has mixed all the episodes of Call the Wild this past year and completely outdid himself today.
Thanks, Dan. To echo what you said, it really has been a year to remember, both good and not so good. Huge shout out to the community here. It's really encouraging to see how you lift each other up through the tough times. Anyways, enough of the sappy stuff. We've got some incredible music to share with you over this next hour. From new releases to tracks that have already become classics, this is going to be an episode to remember.
Great, so let's get right into it. Welcome to Monstercat's Call the Wild. This is the Best of 2020 edition.
Try before I'm on my own. How long do I walk across the wire? Stay till we fall.
First track in, that was Collapse by Pixel Terror and Dirty Chime. I remember first hearing this track in Houston during the Monstercat Uncaged tour last December. Fun fact, Pixel Terror broke their headphones at the previous show, so they ended up using mine after my set, and thankfully didn't jump on them.
Man, I would have loved to see you play live, and honestly, I'm so glad that you got to open for them. So coming up right now, we have AU5 and Chime. This right here is Voidwalkers, and you guys are tuned in to Monstercat's Call the Wild Best of 2020 edition.
Keizo and Delta Heavy with their new record, Tormenta, dropping this week on Monstercat Uncaged. Crazy to think Keizo turned our art car into a main stage at EDC Las Vegas nearly 2.5 years ago. Next up, we've got the hauntingly original track Vex, and I'm sure Dan will never forget this one.
And I don't think the community is going to let me forget it either. For all you guys wondering, Holly's okay. A lot of people have been asking. And no staff were harmed in the recording of that episode.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's get back to the music. Here's Vex by Bensley right here on Call of the Wild.
there was Vagrant by Mazar and Young Medicine, and what an epic set he had for one of our MCTV episodes.
It was absolutely incredible. That drone shot near the end took my breath away.
Oh, it was insane. I think he was in front of this big Italian castle too. It was awesome. Well, speaking of epic sets, Josh, why don't you tell us what's coming up right now?
All right. Next up, we have an anthemic record from Muzz off his The Promised Land album released earlier this year. In case you missed it, Muzz played this entire album live on our Twitch channel, and what an incredible performance it was. We might just have to do more of those in 2021. Here's Starglide featuring Cammie Robinson.
Above my head, like all of my regrets and things I never said. No, got a feeling, shiver in my bones. Something's coming, but nobody knows. Angels rage, they come down from the sky to fix these broken wings and show me how to fly. I burn the sky. I see the fire in your eyes. I come alive.
Heard our Uncaged Spotlight of the Week, and what a huge collab that was. Pixel Terror and Protostar. Are you kidding me?
Two fan favorites on one track. It doesn't get much better than that. Nope. Well, before we talk over this next one, who remembers Darlington's #DNB 2020 takeover we did back in January?
I do.
It was a fun one.
Yes.
Well, he made it very clear that this was the year for DNB to return to the spotlight, and let me tell you, Reaper did more than just answer the call. Here's his hit track Barricade, and don't forget those DNB 2020s in the chat, and at this point, make it DNB 2021.
Deal. You heard it here.
I be taking names as I elevate the barricade.
Every time we reach a new horizon, it's like you don't care that we're leading something bare. And in the water I see cold reflections of what's really there. I'm not waiting on love, our time has come. We're fighting empires and I want to feel the fire again. It's not easy to love when the world is numb. We're fighting empires and we're gonna feel the fire again. truth. Tell me what's bothering you. We know we're future-proof. We know we're future-proof. Tell me the truth. Tell me what's bothering you. We know we're future-proof. We know we're future-proof. Tell me the truth. Tell me what's bothering you. We know we're future-proof. We know we're future-proof. Tell me the truth. Tell me what's bothering you. We know we're future-proof. We know we're future-proof.
All right, thank you, Rogue. That was Empires. And hey, Rogue had actually a pretty memorable year. He is going to be a father. So congrats to him and his wife and the family that they're going to be starting. Now, Josh, why don't you tell us what's coming up right now?
All right, next up, we have one of our top voted records of the year. This is AU5 and Nitrix with Always in a Nightmare. Strap in, this track is sure to knock your socks off.
Call the Wild. Let's go.
Where do we run when time runs out? Where do I go when you're not near? Why can't we live inside the dream? Holding on to just the feeling. Without you, I'm always in a nightmare, nightmare. Without you, my heart won't beat again. Without you, I'm always in a nightmare, nightmare. Without you, the fear will never end. Without you, thought I had her in a lucid grip, said I'd take my time. She keeps calling and she just won't quit, and we all know why. Screws tried to lure me right into an affidavit. When mommy is I'm falling and I'm out of time. I'm caught up in your tongue, they say. You claim that you love me, but it's just another play. I'm stuck inside your room all day. You say it's for my safety, but got a gun and a bag and she's waiting for you. She has the time to decide how she's gonna kill you. You can keep running, keep your eyes wide open, but you never see it coming, no use. She's got a gun and a bag and she's waiting for you. She's got a gun and a bag and she's waiting for you. Hidden kisses always felt so sweet that they left me blind. Making promises we just can't keep, and it felt so right. Screws tried to lure me right into an affidavit. Remind me as I'm falling in, I'm out of time. I'm caught up in your tongue, they say. You claim that you love me, but it's just another play. I'm stuck inside your room all day. You say it's for my safety, but I'm just one of your prey. She's got a gun and a bag and she's waiting for you. She has the time to decide how she's gonna kill you. You can keep running, keep your eyes wide open, but you'll never see it coming, no use. She's got a gun and a bag and she's waiting for you. She's got a gun and a bag and she's waiting for
take the blame. I've seen the world go down in flames. I felt the strain of every loss I can't reclaim. Our steps retraced from when we went our separate ways. I've missed these days. I never thought we'd see this place again. I know the feelings always fade, but nothing else can make me stay. It's walk this road, the one foretold would lead us home. Our fates unknown, but time will mend our broken bones. I've held the weight of all these years spent in decay. These times are strange. I never thought I'd see your face again. I know the feelings always fade, but nothing else can make me stay. It's not too late for us to slip away.
There was Saison and Essinger.
And honestly, he was part of another amazing live stream that we did earlier in 2020. And, you know, now that I think of it, there's so many artists on today's show that did incredible live streams, don't you think?
100%. It's almost like we saw more shows this year amidst everything going on.
I think that's absolutely true. And, you know, regardless of what next year holds for us, I suspect that we're going to continue to see these live streams into the years to come. I think it's such a positive and great addition to the online and music community. So Josh, why don't you tell us what's coming up?
All right, next up we have a mini mix of all the remixes releasing on the Heroes Remix EP, and each is such a different take on the original. You're gonna hear remixes from Shadow, Mateus Ruse, Seth Austin, Skies, and Irons. Let's get it.
Let's keep it moving and keep it like there are no heroes. Not this time. People, let's keep this kind. There are no reasons left to fight. Let's keep it moving and keep it like there are no heroes. Not this time.
Amazing. All of those were incredible. And once again, congrats to Irons for winning the Throttle Remix contest. Now, let's get back to the show. What is coming up?
Yeah, so I don't think the listeners are ready for this. As an homage to our incredible mix contest and community episodes this year, here's a mini mix of Enigma, Dark Room, Form, and Voices.
Ooh, sounds huge. All right, let's get right to it. And you heard it here on Monstercat's Call the Wild Best of 2020 edition.
Everything we've been through makes us strong enough. You and I. Everything we've been through makes us strong enough. You and I.
faces, I'm hearing voices telling me I ain't good enough. And everywhere I go, I'm seeing faces, I'm hearing voices telling me I'm not good enough. 'Cause everywhere I go, I'm seeing faces, I'm hearing voices. 'Cause everywhere I go, I'm seeing faces, I'm hearing voices. Everywhere I go, I'm seeing faces, I'm hearing voices. I'm seeing faces. And everywhere I go, I'm seeing faces, I'm hearing voices telling me I'm not good enough.
Hope you all enjoyed that mini mix. It was a blast to put together. All right, let's change it up a bit. Who do we have coming in now?
Here is a single off of an earlier 2020 big album drop by the legendary duo. And, you know, as a longtime listener of them, it is pretty epic to not only have them on the show, but to also have them part of the launch for one of our first ever MCTV streams of the year. Here is Infected Mushroom.
Gotta be rational. Big monkey is up tonight. I'm in the face, I need evolution. 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 Machine evolution. Without sweating. I need evolution. 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 I need evolution.
is almost it. We are at our last track of the episode.
Wait, already? These hours just go by faster and faster.
I know, and you know what? At least it was a very, very memorable episode today. Thank you to everyone that tuned in and, of course, voted for our best of 2020. Josh, why don't you tell them when the album drops?
Monstercat's Best of 2020 album featuring 40 of our top tracks releases on December 11th. Get hyped.
You heard it. Get hyped. We're going to leave you here, but we have one last track, and this one is going to be our Monstercat Instinct Spotlight of the week, and holy smokes, what a big one, and a way to close out this episode strong. Here is Solid Ground by Cascade, and you heard it right here on Monstercat's Call the Wild.
Hey, Dan, are you forgetting something?
Oh, right. Until next time, later days.
When the sky is getting dark and we're broken in our hearts, when we build our own demise, from the ashes we will rise. When the world is falling down, will you be my solid ground? When the world is falling down, will you be my solid ground? Be my solid We look off the edge till the